The show where we speak to all the makers and shakers within the tabletop space and having fun and meaningful conversations while we're at it. And tonight's a really, really special episode, as you can see from our remarkable guests. But before we get to all that, a mission statement first. I and this channel stand against genocide and ethnic cleansing, and we support all the oppressed peoples all over the world struggling against injustice, imperialism, and colonization. Free DRC, free Sudan, and free Palestine. And with that, hi everyone, I'm Valiant Dorian. I assume his pronouns. I'm your host this evening for Dicey Banter. And you can find me all around the internet at Valiant Dorian or at Also Spirit Bear. Please enjoy that lovely treasure I just set you on. And as you can see from my guest on this overlay, tonight I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing our amazing guest. So he is an award-winning, critically acclaimed designer of one of my favorite TTRPGs of all time, the Wildsea, and his soon-to-be released Pico. Everyone, please welcome Felix Isaacs. Felix, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, I am Felix Isaacs. I did write the Wildesea and Pico, and I haven't really done much else, to be honest. They both took a long time. So I'd love to advertise a little bit of stuff, but it just doesn't exist.
You say that like you do not fully have like a massive book with the Wildsea, a massive project with Pico, and then also the massive expansion of the Wildsea.
Oh, okay. Well, yes. All right. If I want to get technical, then yes, I am Felix Isaacs, author of the Wildsea core book, the Wildsea Storm and Root, the Wildsea Red Right Hand, the Wildsea One Arm Scissor, and the Wildsea Ship Gardens expansion, plus the up and coming game Pico.
There we go. Thanks, Felix. And you can check all those details out, folks, using exclamation point Felix and exclamation point games to go and check out the links to all of the games, as well as the links to Felix's website and Patreon. Go and support him, please, right now. I'll wait. Do that really quick. And with that, but before we get into the interview proper, folks, if you're enjoying today's episode of Dicey Banter, please consider donating and leaving us a tip. The funds raised will be used to tip myself and our amazing guests to show our appreciation. Please use exclamation point donate in chat to support us. And if you enjoyed the episode and want to get this earlier than everyone else, consider pledging to my Patreon. Even at the free or the lowest tier, you'll be able to get access to behind the scenes content and really, really cool stuff. With that, Felix, let's get into the interview proper and let's have a chat about TTRPGs. So first, let's talk about how you got here. Let's talk about the journey about how you got here. How did you get here? How did you get into TTRPGs in the first place?
I was really bored during college.
Yep.
And I had this weird thing.
Okay.
If you want to do the real history of it,
okay.
I had this weird thing where, through a load of strange circumstances, I ended up taking an extra year when I didn't actually need to.
Okay.
I'd already been accepted to university. I just ended up. I had a gap year, and I was like, "What can I do in this gap year?" I'll do some more college, I guess, which is a really stupid thing in hindsight. Although I suppose
a gap year to do college. This is very interesting.
I didn't make the most of it. Some people travel the world. I just carried on going to college. This is a weird thing to do, but it was an accident. Like I said, I don't want to get into how, but it was an accident. But I enjoyed it, and one of the things I did in that extra gap year, because most people I knew had just left, obviously. Gap year was join my college's little unofficial role-playing game club, because I thought that looked quite fun, and I played a bit of Magic the Gathering, and that was kind of like my kind of gateway drug into it. I never really had an interest in role-playing games before that. I knew they existed, but it always seemed too complicated. And I had a fantastic kind of GM/DM/keeper, because what we played back then was mostly Call of Cthulhu.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, a brilliant game. I don't know about the new editions. I haven't read them, because that would involve taking time away from writing things. But the older editions, excellent. Had their flaws, obviously, in retrospect.
Yeah.
But like, you don't notice that kind of thing as a new player. And absolutely amazing keeper, who is now a game designer in their own right, and one far more famous than me.
That is really, really cool. I think you are the first guest in Dicey Banter history to cite Call of Cthulhu as your first sort of like foray to the TTRPG like world. The number one game for a lot of our guests has been like in terms of the entry point has been Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. Funnily enough, has been like a huge entry point for a lot of the guests on the show. How did you?
If I had to go for my second most played, it would be D&D 3.5. That's what I played
There we go.
after Call of Cthulhu. But Call of Cthulhu was the first one, and the one that we probably played the most, I think. So.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was Call of Cthulhu is such an interesting game to start on as well because when I first played Call of Cthulhu, I played it one time. One time I played it, and I remember having to like wrap my head around the mechanics, and I knew how TRPGs worked at that point. So kudos to you as a like new player getting into like Call of Cthulhu at that point. So you started.
I think it did me really well, actually.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, so
I think it gave me a really good start. Yeah, because what Call of Cthulhu does that I won't say a lot of role-playing games. Obviously, there's a huge amount of role-playing games that do very different things.
Oh yeah,
but a lot of the popular role-playing games, they tend to only give you challenges that you're supposed to be able to meet in some way.
okay.
Which makes you kind of expect that all challenges should be surmountable. And what Call of Cthulhu is very good at doing is giving you challenges that are truly insurmountable. Like you're expected to lose and continue from that losing in some way. I really like that. That was a good start, I think.
I played in a Call of Cthulhu game that was on stream, and it's an actual play series with Daisies and Dragons, set in colonial India, specifically in the Assam region, and it was truly amazing the depths of insurmountable obstacles we were set against. It was still like a lot of fun to play. We had a really good keeper as well. And he's great. Y'all should go check out that show. So you started off with Call of Cthulhu in this role-playing club. And so tell me, how did that Felix at that point of time jump to the state of current Felix, where you're deep into the game design, deep into game writing? When did that transition happen? And like, was it an accident? How did you get into this?
So there were two tipping points. The one that kind of started me on it, and then the one that made it a job rather than just a hobby.
Yeah.
The first one was working abroad. I spent quite some time working abroad, teaching, as a lot of people work abroad do. And it was a lovely experience, but I did start to miss some of the things that I used to have in terms of social connections. So I started a little RPG club out there, which was really fun. But we couldn't really decide on what to play. So I ended up kind of stitching a few things together and making the kind of bare essentials of a system.
Okay.
Which was disconnected from any kind of particular genre. I was just kind of experimenting with like, would these rules suit the particular players I have now?
Yeah.
And it was after a year or two of playing that and dipping in and out of a couple of kind of classic games, back to Call of Cthulhu, back to, I think, Pathfinder rather than 3.5 at that point, that I thought, actually, I enjoy playing my own thing a bit more than I do these other things. And then I pushed it a bit further, and the setting, the Wildsea, was a kind of stroke. I'm not going to say stroke of genius. That's very self-aggrandizing, but it was an inspiration from the world around me that just kind of clicked. And I thought, I could make that. I could make that as a setting. And I kind of toyed with that back and forth and did some playtesting and made it into about a kind of 60-ish page early playtest, which was released for free. And that's when the Discord started and a few other kind of related things happened. But I never thought, I always assumed it would just be like, I would get it up to a reasonable thing, release it as a PDF for a couple of quid, and then just, that's done.
Yeah.
But then COVID hit, and my job, which was still teaching at the time, went remote. And I realized I did not like teaching online. It just didn't have the same spark as being in the classroom.
Yeah.
And especially teaching like EFL stuff, that you want that kind of that physical presence if you can get it. And so I kind of slowly transitioned out of teaching, and lived off savings for a year, which was pretty tight in terms of budget.
Yeah.
But it gave me time to write, and by the end of that year, I'd also met the publishers. By happenstance, really, and thought like, oh, actually, this could be a thing. Not enough of a thing that I didn't go back to teaching after COVID ended, after
Yeah.
kind of restrictions were lifted. But I went back to it part-time rather than full-time. And now I don't do it at all. Now game design and stuff is my full-time job. So
What a journey. Oh my goodness. And like, and for Wildsea to kind of be like your first, like, I know you've built semi systems in order to like engage folks, which I feel like every person who's been assigned the role of game master has done, to especially when introducing new players into tabletop role-playing games. And then for that to kind of like move and build the Wildsea is deeply wild to me. We'll talk more about the Wildsea in a second. Um, but truly, what an incredible sort of like transition there. So in the vein of your game design, I wanted to ask you about what aspects of game design or like game design principles would constitute something that is Felix core. Like, what are the little tenets of like games that are you deep into their bones?
Okay, if I had to identify the real core ones, I'm actually going to quote someone else, because they said this really offhandedly, and it stuck with me to the point that I think I actually quoted it in the Wildsea core book. Rick, he was our head of playtesting back when the Wildsea first started expanding. He is now works at MythWorks as their chief people person. Fantastic player, incredible GM, and general creative force. But he said to me, when people stop having fun, it stops being a game, and that really stuck. Which is why I think a lot of my game design stuff, I'm not going to try and think of a big cool word to use there. A lot of my game design stuff revolves around like, is there a cool thing I can do in this moment? No, then I've made it wrong. Like, because you can only shepherd people so far with story and rules. But you should be able to, I think, for the stuff I make at least, you should always have rules that support being able to turn a situation into a time to shine, into a time to have fun. Even if it's a hopeless situation, or even if it's like you're saying you're not perfectly suited to, there should still be something you can do as a player, and something your character should do as a character that you can enjoy, rather than just kind of, well, I'm going to hit this goblin again, even though I know it's not going to do much damage. Like, that's boring. That's
Yeah. Oh no, I really love that, because that's so important, I think, especially for folks who are deep in the game design tunnel, as I like to call it, when you're just kind of like writing and designing, you just kind of like in your own head, in your own thoughts for an extended and prolonged period of time. Your mind can be really bogged down and like not, because I know I'm guilty of this, at least, of like forgetting about the fun I'm supposed to be having, or the fun that I'm hoping others would have when they pick up a copy of my game, and just like relish in the joy of creation there. So that's like a very, very moving quote. I think I remember that in the Wildsea core book.
Yeah, it's a good quote, and I can't take any credit for it because I didn't say it. So
it's a brilliant quote, and I love the Wildsea. I have read the rule book. You can tell I read it a lot if I'm like, oh, that quote. That quote.
I just love the way you said that. I also love the Wildsea. I have read it. I wasn't going to disbelieve you.
I just realized how that came up. No. No, what I meant to say is like I had this realization as we're discussing that I've read it a lot of times, and that and it is a little embarrassing to be like, yeah, I read it enough times for me to go, oh yeah, that quote sounds really familiar. I'm the person in my friend group that keeps trying to pull people into the Wildsea, being like, please be little pirates with me. I will run the game for you. Come, listen to my siren song.
I've heard that a lot. Yeah. Oddly enough, if you've read it, then you've probably read the finished product more than I have, because I haven't read the finished product.
Oh my goodness. Really? That's
I
wild.
I can't. It's weird.
Mm,
Because I read it so much putting it together, and I've read every section so many times and gone through every section, and like you do so much through editing as well.
yeah.
Even though I have an editor who is a wonderful person and very, very good at her job and very good at chopping sense into the drivel that I write. She did this thing through the editing process where I would be reading whole chunks and slowly changing things. And then once I changed it, she would then read it again, tell me it was okay, put it back, I'd read through it again. By the time the book was complete, I'd read the entire thing, essentially cover to cover, 2 or 3 times in a row in the space of about a month. And it's just like, I love it as a book. I'm very proud of it. It's not perfect, obviously, but I am, especially for a first thing, I'm very proud of it.
You should absolutely be proud of it. Yes.
But I can't read it again. Not the way I read it when I was doing that.
I get it. I remember my days at university with like the many essays and dissertations that I had to write, and that comes a point where you're like, I never want to look at this ever again. And I could definitely foresee that happening with rule books. I mean, it's nice to have the physical copy in your hands. I do not want to, trouble you at all, or your eyes, with having to read text that you've probably had to edit, polish, edit again multiple times throughout the process.
Well, recently, oddly enough, this is actually kind of at the forefront of my mind recently, because I've been reading the submissions for like a Halloween game jam type thing, or
oh, cool.
No, it wasn't really a game jam. It was a Wildsea content jam, I guess.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So community created content for the Wildsea, which we hosted on Itch, thanks to Lady Tabletop, who is a fantastic community person in the Wildsea Discord. And excellent designer in her own right. She organized this thing, and I was like, yeah, we can do that. That sounds good. And I'm still, even though it was in October, still slowly going through the last of the contest entries, because I'm terrible at things. And while doing it, every now and then I'll come across something, like I read one today, which was about a kind of imperialistic pirate faction.
Ooh.
And I read it and thought, is this taking inspiration from something in the book? And I did have to go back to the book, and I did have to check, and I was like, no, it's not. This is their own idea with this thing, because the thing I thought it was taking inspiration from was left on the cutting room floor and never made it into the book. So it was really nice seeing someone else's interpretation, obviously, of the same idea, the same kind of thought process, but them coming at it from a different angle. And that's really lovely to see. But every now and then people will go like, oh, I wish there was such and such. And I can go, well, actually, that's in the book. I remember putting that in there. But every now and then people will go, oh, I really like such and such. And it's like, oh, what is that? Community created content. And they're like, no, Felix, it's on page 204. And it's like, oh, okay. Because I can't remember
not
everything.
You going, is that fan content when it was your content? You the guy that made this game. It's hilarious to me.
But I tell you what, there are very few feelings that rival reading something and going, oh, that's really good. I really like that. And then being reminded that you wrote it. That's a good feeling.
That's a great feeling. Oh yeah,
that's a good feeling.
That's a great feeling. No, you're so right.
It doesn't happen often, unfortunately, but it is a good feeling.
Hey, but when it does happen, I'm sure it's like it's one of those sort of like creatively like rejuvenating things that kind of just like empowers you for the next God knows how long. And you can like ride that high for your next like creative venture. I totally feel you on that. Oh, that's
unfortunately,
so cool.
it's also pretty rare that it happens. But more often, I really enjoy seeing people's like play reports and discussion about things, because I see what they've done with the kind of building blocks that the book sets out. And so often what they've done is so creative, or what their group has done, the choices they've made are things I never would have considered as a designer. And it's lovely to see things that you've made being taken further than you can take them through the medium of text. It's really cool. So
that's like the big game designer dream, is to kind of like be, it's like every creative designer's dream, I think, to be a fly on the wall, a disembodied omnipotent like eyeball in the sky, to be able to see every single game that your like game or system has like existed in every living room or every like Discord call forever. I know I've had those days where I'm like, I wonder what kind of table will get my game and play it, which is really cool. But because now you have this contest that's able to kind of like see the contributions that the fan community have towards the Wildsea, so you kind of get that little like peering lens into the stuff that folks are making in their own games,
Yeah.
inspired by your work.
Well, I've been really lucky. The Wildsea Discord, especially, but the kind of general Wildsea fandom, if that's the right word to use, community is a
Yeah,
better
community.
word. I don't like fandom. The general Wildsea community are, on the whole, an absolutely lovely bunch and very creative. And so often I will see things that they're doing or things they put together, and it's just like I am incredibly blessed is a word I don't use very much, but I feel incredibly blessed to have fans that engage with the source material and take it so far. It's really, really lovely. Also, I very rarely have to answer questions these days. If
That's
someone says, like,
awesome.
oh, yeah, how does X work? Someone else will just go, oh, it works like this. And I'm just read over the answer and go, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's correct.
Or occasionally, how does X work? Oh, it doesn't. Felix mess that bit up and then look at it and go, yeah, that's fair. So
Not that. I love that for you, and I'm looking forward to looking over these entries now because I'm very very curious to see what folks have come up with for the Wildsea. And since we're already talking about the Wildsea, let's just transition back into the Wildsea. And it's, as I've already said at the top of the stream, it is like one of my favorite games. Is definitely in my like top 3 favorite TTRPGs of all time. I really really enjoy playing it. I really enjoy running it. It's a lot of fun. I really, really enjoy it. It's very, very intuitive. But I gotta ask you this, Felix. What came first? Was it the Wild Words engine or was it the World of the Wildsea? I need to know.
oh, the world, 100% the world. Oh well, oh no. Okay, so
Okay.
I've just lied. I'm a terrible liar. No.
20 minutes in, Felix liar. Felix is now a liar.
Question 3. How dare you? No. So what happened is with those the scraps of a system I was putting together. They worked well enough mechanically to kind of hang a game on, and the Wildsea was the setting that got hung on them.
Yeah.
But the Wildsea as a setting definitely outpaced the Wildsea as a rule set. So
Okay.
Wild Words didn't exist back then. It was just a loose collection of mechanics that kind of solidified around the bits of the Wildsea that they worked for. And after the first year of testing and kind of back and forth with a regular play group, I realized there were things they wanted to do that the current mechanics didn't support that well, or just like they were okay but not perfect. And that's when the system started changing to benefit the setting particularly. And I think that's probably the true start of the Wild Words engine as a thing, I think.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Okay, so that does like answer a lot for me. So, since you did initially start off with like, oh yeah, the world, then I would like to like follow up and ask you about like the origins of the Wildsea as a setting and as an idea, because I remember, like seeing the game. We were going to play it for Transplaner, and we were reading through the rule books. And I remember like telling my brother about it, and he like I guess misunderstood me when I meant that it is sea of like trees and plants and foliage and stuff like that. And he was just like, "Oh, wait, I misunderstood. This is like fundamentally different." I'm like, yes, it is. So I wanted to ask you about the origins of that, of the world building that you've made for Wildsea. What inspired it?
I was working as a teacher, and I had my desk in an office among some lovely people, very far from home. And I spent a lot of time, because I'd gotten all my lessons planned quite early in the year. And things always change, but you end up with a bit of time in your hands. I could have studied languages. I could have done a lot of things, but I spent a lot of time staring out the window. Because out the window was a really beautiful sight, because I had windows in front of me and to the right of me. I promise this is going somewhere. I had windows in front of me and to the right of me, and in front of me was a forested like mountainside, absolutely beautiful. And then to the right of me were the slopes of it leading off to the sea. So I had forest, mountain, and sea all in one kind of vista. And I would love to say that kind of solidified in my head over the years, and the Wildsea was born from this beautiful kind of seed, but it wasn't that at all. What it was watching that mountainside over the course of 2 weeks get absolutely stripped bare of trees so they could put up concrete reinforcements, which were necessary because, I mean, there were rock slides, so it's not like it, and it was for safety. But it was watching that all get torn down, all of the greenery get torn off, and then over the next year, watching it slowly grow back over those concrete reinforcements. That was really, really cool. And I think it was that plus the sea and the proximity of it all being like, nature's really good at winning when we stop kind of actively destroying it. What would the world be like if nature was even better at winning? Or what would it be like if in a world where nature always won? And that's the kind of genesis of the Wildsea. So
that is really, really cool. I mean, I can like understand the kind of like the sadness, I guess, and the grief that comes of watching a beautiful like natural vista be changed due to industrialization and things like that. I live in Malaysia, and that's like a tale as old as time here. We will build a thing, it'll cause landslides, and then we destroy more of nature to build like safety measures to prevent those landslides. And it's just this kind of like endless cycle, and nature kind of like suffers from it. But like your kind of like description of like, oh yeah, I'm watching like nature kind of like grow over it and like win and like begin to chart a course of their own is really, really cool. And I can see how it births the Wildsea, which is really, really cool and wonderful. So so that's the origin of the Wildsea. We heard the kind of like genesis of the Wild Words engine. There was a different sort of like patchwork set of mechanics that you had for the Wildsea, and that it transformed into the Wild Words engine. And this engine is really good at balancing narrative flow of gameplay while having a nice, satisfying crunch of mechanics. So I wanted to ask, since you got the feedback from the players, what was your process in like building the Wild Words engine, striking that balance, and actually making the Wildsea in terms of the playability, the gameplay side of it, what it is today?
Lots and lots of false starts and ideas that didn't go anywhere, and then occasionally an idea that just hit and kind of sunk in and was perfect. And learning more about the RPG community when I was 95% finished, because being abroad and working abroad, I've never been a big social media person.
Fair,
so
and
I didn't
valid.
really have, I wasn't big on catching up on news either, and I felt quite disconnected. I still, in a way, feel quite disconnected from the TTRPG industry, even though I guess I'm now literally part of it. So I had missed the fiction first boom of like the early 2010s. I'd missed Powered by the Apocalypse. I'd missed Blaze in the Dark. I'd missed all that stuff. The stuff I was creating was based very much on my experiences playing Call of Cthulhu and 3.5 and a bit of 4th edition D&D and Pathfinder, and very little else other than video games. And I was very current with video games because I had a Steam account, and I had a lot of free time in the evenings. So, so a lot of video games influenced the Wildsea's mechanics far more than people expect. There's one of the common things that people think is that the concept of like tracks in the Wild Words engine comes from either the clocks of Blaze in the Dark or the possible clocks. I can't remember if PBTA has clocks or tracks, or it's got something.
Some PBTA games do, yeah.
Okay, yeah, or from PBTA, and people are always like, well, it's obvious inspiration from that, and it's like, I had no idea what that was when I made tracks. Because if I knew clocks existed, I probably would have just used clocks, which wouldn't have been. I don't think it would have been as good for the Wildsea as tracks have ended up, because tracks have been, and for the Wild Words engine as a whole, because they're quite flexible in ways that clocks aren't in the same way.
Yeah.
But it was actually taken from playing the browser-based game of Fallen London, because they.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's a brilliant game. I mean, not every season is perfect, but it's a brilliant game overall, with some really good engaging stories. And what they had back in the 2010s was, I feel really old now. What they had back then was the Story Nexus engine, which was a creation tool for making your own versions of the kind of full and London style game, with flippable cards and countdowns and things, and values for character attributes. And the way the value system in the Story Nexus engine worked was it was essentially a kind of a set track, but it was numerical rather than physically represented. And when you reach certain points on that track, certain things would happen. Every now and then there'd be an event that would check, oh, do you have like X amount of numbers in this thing, or are you not there yet? And that's where tracks came from, because it was like, oh, I can adapt that to tabletop. That's really, really good.
Yeah.
Of course, what I didn't know was that the industry had done that like 5 years before, just in circular form. And I was just behind the curve. But it means that a lot of the things that the Wild Words engine does, and that the Wildsea does, specifically as a game, are things that are not entirely original, but they work slightly differently than a lot of people expect. And it does. I've heard this a lot, and I think it's very, very accurate. It's very much a fiction first game with a slightly more old schooly, crunchy feel in places, and that's because that was my game design influence from the actual tabletop industry. But it is, like I said, I got about 95% of the way through finalizing all the rules and things. But the one thing that never really clicked was the dice engine. It used to be terrible. Really bad. I made a really bad dice engine back then. I feel so bad for my playtest players that had to use it for so long. It was like a kind of hybrid D12 and D6 system. It was weird. There was success counting. It was a whole thing. It wasn't good. And then finally, I found Blades in the Dark. Not the book, because I wasn't living in a place where you could buy the book, and I didn't think about buying PDFs online. But I found the kind of adventures of the Six Towers gang, I think it was. Earliest Blades in the Dark things are on YouTube. And watching those and hearing the dice system they were using described without even reading it, I was like, oh, that works so much better. That is exactly the kind of thing I need. And luckily, that worked well enough with the non-numerical parts of the Wild Words dice engine, like already existed, etc. And Twist already existed. So I could take. Thanks, John Harper. I took that basically whole cloth, and just went. I can yoink those numbers, that 1 to 6 thing with just like search for the highest number. Now suddenly it's search for the highest number and any doubles, and also you might get to remove dice and etc. etc. So it all fits together really well. So it's one of those weird things where people go, "Oh, you took tracks from clocks," and it's like, I definitely didn't. And then they go, "Oh yeah, bet you're gonna say you didn't steal the dice system either." It's like, no, I totally did. I stole the dice system.
Oh no, that one shamelessly. No, I definitely stole that one. Absolutely. Absolutely, I did that. I'm honest about the theft I commit. No, I
think that's really important, though. I think you should be honest about this, especially in our industry. I think it's really, really important that you share.
It's also really hard.
Yeah,
it's really hard in our industry as well, because I feel like that one, there's so many TTRPGs out there with so many different like perspectives and lenses and game design philosophies, and as we are, as players, as GMs, as we consume all these different games, like we are inspired by different bits of it. So yeah, I feel like there is almost a slight inevitability of like certain aspects either feeling like a harkening back or reminiscent of certain mechanics or certain like game design philosophies, and at the same time being like incredibly honest and being like, I'm probably been inspired by a few things, while I was making and crafting this game. It's probably have been, and being like very, very clear cut about that is deeply important. I do want to like tap into the like idea about the Wildsea being like a fiction forward game with kind of like old school mechanics, because one of the first few things that we said on Transplanar, and one of the reasons why we really, really enjoyed it when we did our first arc of the Chaos Protocol using the Wildsea, was like, wow, this is an incredible game to be able to get folks who are used to playing games like D&D and Pathfinder and things like that to delve into fiction first while still having that nice sort of like bit of crunch, bit of mechanics that feel like that sort of like reminiscent of feeling when you play D&D and Pathfinder and things like that. It made it
Yeah.
very, very easy to for not only for us as players to transition to, even though we play a lot of fiction forward games. It also was really, really helpful for our audience because they could even like very easily like buy into like cut and twists and like listening to us roll numbers. I have, thanks to the Wildsea, I have the historical lowest die roll in all of Transplanar history of 5 ones.
Hey, it's not a twist.
I was like, this is a historical low, and I need to know that there's someone out there who is in the Wildsea community. Make yourselves known. That has rolled a lower thing than I have, because that would be comforting for me.
I have actually seen what is numerically the worst possible Wildsea result.
Tell me.
I've seen it in a game I was running. Someone rolled 4 dice, and they got with a cut of 1, and they rolled a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 6. So they lost the 6, and then had no twist, no doubles, and every single disaster result they possibly could. So they didn't get any benefit from it whatsoever, and it was just a pure disaster. But with the extra horribleness of like success was so close.
Oh no! Oh, that
That was a
sucks. Oh, that
that
sucks.
was a great moment
Godspeed.
for me as a DM, though. I loved it.
Godspeed. And also as a tracks enjoyer, I really like tracks. I love I love like just subtly threatening my players with a track and being like, "Oh, it's I'm gonna fill that in now." Watching them go, "Why'd you fill that in?" Why'd you? And yeah, I really do love the tracks, and like everything that you said feels, as someone who's played the game and run the game a couple of times, very deeply resonant with the community, and I think you succeeded with that.
Oh,
Um,
good.
yeah, and since the first printing of the Wildsea and the core rulebook, you now have an expansion. The expansion is for folks who are at home. The expansion is called Storm and Root. It is a massive 300-page expansion, which includes uh, flight, diving, as well as additional character creation aspects, including bloodlines, origins, and posts. So
Yep.
I wanted to first ask you, like in kind of like an overarching sort of way, um, what was the process of expanding the Wildsea? Like, what did that look like? Was it always on the cards, or was this something that kind of like happened later on, or were these aspects that were on the cutting room floor that you developed for the expansion?
So, funny story.
Okay.
I was new to developing a game, especially a game that was, actually going to hit shelves. That was a
Hmm.
weird thing for me when we did the first Kickstarter for the Wildsea. So I was also new to the concept of scope creep. That
Okay.
was something that I had never had to deal with before, and I'd never had to deal with over promising and under delivering. That just wasn't a thing that existed in the industries I worked in before. So one of the stretch goals for the Wildsea core book was that we would add a chapter. So looking back at it now, I had such good intentions, and they ended up defining the next like 2 years of my life after that.
Oh my
Adding a
goodness.
chapter on airships and submersibles, because it was a fun thing, and I had a few ideas for it. And then as I continued writing the book, and as it got bigger and bigger, and the core book got to 364 pages or something ridiculous, I realized there is no way I can put airships and submersibles in this book. There's no way, because I had, without thinking about it, thought, yeah, that would be a chapter. It's a chapter on like, here's a special thing, like making a ship is a chapter. It's a reasonably big chapter,
Yeah.
but it's still just a chapter, right?
Yeah.
But you can't have airship. I came to the realization you can't have airships and submersibles on their own. You need systems of play that support them. You need extra challenges that work with them. You need characters that can make the most of these new systems. It was just, that's not a chapter. That's a book. So what I did was, when we released the core book, I went to the backers in a Kickstarter post and was like, just so you know, I can't do this. I can't do this thing. But what I will do is I will make an expansion for airships and submersibles, and I will release it to backers of the original Wildsea for free, because it is essentially a stretch goal for you people that supported me for the first book.
Yeah.
And it also means like, hey, I'll have a new product I can sell to other people, which is good.
Yeah.
And so that was scoped as like 120-page book at that point.
Felix.
And then
Felix.
I realized, like, well, if I'm doing airships and submersibles, I can add some more fun options.
Felix.
So I did. And then I realized, like, well, if I'm adding more options there, I can add some more reaches, so I can have more like pre-made settings, and like, oh, this community created one that was really, really good. I want to see that on the page. I'm gonna pay that person for their reach, credit them the book, and say, hey, like, this is a guest reach. This is fantastic. Just remember the community. And then I realized if we're doing that, because that guest reach had like some extra, I think it had an origin and a bloodline and a post in it. I was like, I can make some more bloodlines and posts. And maybe ones that aren't even just connected to the airships submersibles, maybe just some ideas that didn't make it into the first book. And a year later, I had another 300-page book. And I remember one of the first responses I ever got from one of the original Wildsea backers, because we did still give it to them for free, was like, why have I got a new Wildsea book? And it's like, oh, because this is the airships submersibles thing that we promised like way back in the original campaign. And they went, oh, I just assumed we weren't going to see that, and that was fine. And it's like, why have I spent all this time doing this thing?
I'm gonna be so real with you, Felix. The number of times I've backed a project and I'm like, I mean, what was it? I backed a project when I was doing my bar course in the UK, and I was like, oh, it's been a while since I've like heard back from it. And then as soon as I thought about that, I got like an email notification being like, oh yeah, it's shipping to your location. This was in the year of our Lord 2024. I ordered it maybe in 2021. So it's been like 3 some years. And I was like, oh wow, cool. That's like it is like one thing that I know that I actually like deeply appreciate is that there is sort of this kind of like slight social understanding, I think, in the crowdfunding community of like, these are like would like to have, especially when it comes to like stretch goals and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
But my God, did you deliver on all of that, huh? 300 pages. I heard your process and I was like, oh no, I see where this is going, Felix.
I kind of felt like at some point I felt like I overpromised, so I may as well overdeliver as well, to make up for the overpromise in the first place. But I tell you what, whatever future campaigns I'm running, I'm not going to add an extra chapter as a stretch goal. That's a no.
I feel like that's dangerous for you specifically, so maybe we don't do that for you.
And there are still so many Wildsea ideas that I haven't gotten around to doing yet that I really want to do, which is a shame. And I really
cool.
want to. Yeah, no, I want to, but some of them I don't know how feasible some of them are.
No, that
because
makes sense.
the Wildsea is a very different game than it was when it was first made. Something I've had, I guess the privilege is the right word. I've had the privilege of watching the core book being taken, and then especially with the big bump in popularity that the Quinn's review gave us, and suddenly we were selling a lot more books, and there were a lot more people talking about and playing the Wildsea. That exposed it to people from kind of different schools of play, I guess. Suddenly we were being picked up by more traditional gamers and by some completely new gamers. I know some people now who the Wildsea is their first RPG, because they were grabbed by the setting, and it's like, oh wow, I've introduced new players to a thing. That's really
weird. Those are
because it was suddenly a different thing. People were playing in different ways, and that's changed the game fundamentally. Sorry.
No. I was gonna affirm you on the new players. There are so folks in some of my friend groups who had never picked up an RPG before, but I told them about the Wildsea. They thought that was deeply cool. They love pirates, and I was like, "Cool, I'll run this game for you." And they never played an RPG before, and they played the Wildsea. They had a great time. So yeah, I can confirm this is indeed a reality.
That's a really cool feeling.
And they love it. They and for people who are like unfamiliar with like a lot of the kind of like, like core tenets in RPG elements, like dice rolling, project clocks, tracks, all of these things, they can kind of just like sink into the fiction of the world and enjoy the RPG. It's really cool. And I wanted to affirm you on the yeah, there are new players who pick up this game and they're like, this is really cool. Can I play more? And I'm like, sure. If we can all find a time we can be available and free for to play a game, absolutely I'll run more of this for you.
Which unfortunately means no most of the time these days. So, yeah.
Um,
Oh,
that's
adult life.
adult life. Scheduling is the BBEG. I will say this constantly. It is truly the villain in all of our dreams for TTRPGs. But yeah, I think on that note, that was a great point for us to have a quick 10-minute break. Thank you, folks, for hanging out with us and for chatting. Please get up, stretch, pet your pets. Tell them Mr. Valiant Dorian loves them very, very much. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about some tail end elements of the Wildsea, Pico, Felix's other game, and then we're going to talk about stuff like niche world building and some cautionary tales for the budding game designer. And with that, we're going to take our break. Take care, everyone. See you soon. Bye. Welcome, makers and shakers in the TJRPG space while having fun, meaningful conversations while we're at it. As you can see, I have tormented Felix the entirety of this interview.
It's been lovely.
Asking the hard-hitting questions at Felix and
Oh, yeah.
demanding nothing but the truth here on Dicey Banter. I hope you all have been enjoying the show. Huge reminder, please use the commands in chat to gain access to not only Felix's social links, as well as websites and all the cool stuff you should be following him on, as well as the games that we're talking about today, which are the Wildsea and Pico. So please go ahead and use those commands in chat. And if you are enjoying today's episode, please consider donating, giving us a tip. Use !donate in chat to get the link to donate. And we appreciate the support. And with that, let's jump right back into the interview. Before we left off for the break, we were talking about the Wildsea expansion, Storm and Root. And Storm and Root, as we've talked about, and have unveiled that it was meant to be one chapter that kind of like expanded, meant to kind of like start with rule sets, as well as the expansion of flight, as well as diving. And now it includes as well as additional reaches, character creation options, etc. So you've introduced the access to flying and submerging to the depths of the Wildsea as part of this. And you talked about, like, as you were building this, you're realizing that you needed to kind of like build the kind of like mechanical support to support these new aspects that you were introducing to submersibles and airships. So what can players expect with the introduction of these mechanics? Well, can we have like a little teaser of what that looks like for those things?
Yeah, the airship portion of it is a very different game. The airship portion of it takes the Wildsea, I mean, upwards, obviously, but it takes you away from the sea itself and puts you into a kind of a different play space. It's the bit of the Wildsea and the expansions I've played the least, because I know you're not meant to say this about your own games, but it's the bit I enjoy the least. Because
we all have a favorite child in game design.
Exactly. People really wanted it, and I'm glad the people that do enjoy it, but it's not my preferred mode of play. I enjoy the options, and I enjoy some of the flexibility it gives. But like, whenever people say they're going to try the Wildsea and they really want to do the airships, I'm like, start on the waves first and work up to it, because I think it's important to experience the sea at sea level before you kind of head up. And the diving section is the complete opposite of that, because the submersibles part of Storm and Root I wish had been in the core game, and if I was ever to do a second edition, there is a good chance I would make it part of the core game, because it builds on the themes of the original Wildsea far better than the airship section, I think, because a lot of the new systems that were built up for the submersible section are more directly related to existing systems in the core game. Pressure and the kind of concept of, because pressure in Storm and Root is not just physical pressure of moving deeper into the canopy. It's the psychological pressure of suddenly you are, the lone point of light in a very hostile, dark place. Pulling from things like Subnautica and stuff for the kind of feeling of that kind of descent. But it also pulls more from the Call of Cthulhu style of thing, because in the core game, Maya, the system, which is for the uninitiated, essentially when you spend more time out on the waves and when you witness or take part in terrible things, the worst tendencies of your character start to come out, and Maya's are character-specific malices, essentially, that you slowly mark as they grow, which could affect roleplay at first, and then affect the mechanics as well. And the pressure system from Storm and Root is essentially an upgraded version of Maya, but applies to an entire ship or individual crew members as well. It's bigger and more flexible, and all of that is taken from the inspiration of those early days playing Call of Cthulhu, because Call of Cthulhu has at the time, fantastic sanity system, but looking back on it, you can't really do that sort of thing these days because we have a better awareness, A, of mental health in general, but B, of what is and isn't fun / appropriate to play at the table. So
Yeah.
I try not to shy away from a lot of things, but there is a difference between not shying away from something and approaching something with a level of respect.
Yes.
And I think Maya's are my way of doing that as much as possible, because it means that players do get to play bad situations, worse versions of themselves.
Yeah.
But they're not randomly rolling on a table for it.
Absolutely. Yes. And that is one of my favorite things about Myers.
Crafted themselves. Yeah. They're purposely crafted.
Yeah.
And the pressure system brings that back in with random rolls, because people do love random rolls.
Yes,
but suddenly it's oh yeah. But it brings it in as a slightly less character specific thing, because when it's happening to the ship rather than you as an individual, you have more freedom with how you interact with that in roleplay, I think.
Yes.
And that was quite an important thing. So things like that. I think the delving portion of Storm and Root delves more into the psychological horror elements of the world. And the airship portion of it just delves more into, you can see more, you can do more, you have freedom for the first time, true freedom to go anywhere and do anything, which is, again, it's a different way to play, but it doesn't grab me as much as why am I criticizing my own work? It doesn't grab me as much as the delving section. But I mean, it does mean that hopefully you can tell, like, this is a thing that through playtesting and through play, I have realized over the years, like, it's not that I don't like it, it's that I've kind of refined my own tastes in my own setting and I enjoy. Yeah,
I do fully believe that, like, every game designer does have like favorite. I know I have favorite children. When it comes to like game design, right? Like I feel like that's completely natural, and yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. And like stepping back a little bit to the Myers conversation, like one of my favorite things about Myers is the player buy-in of like, okay, here's the section in your character sheet where we talk about the not so nice parts about yourself, and being like a little self-reflective. What are the aspects of yourself within the fiction that can flare, that can lash out, that can ultimately like bog not only yourself but the people around you down, right? Like people, because people have flaws, which I really really like, and being able to have like mechanics and other sort of like systems in place within the game that can consolidate and kind of like let that aspect of gameplay sing is really really fun. And now I'm really excited about the potential of running a game that's a psychological horror, where I pull folks deep into the Wildsea, and that's really really cool to know that we've got some cool stuff for the Myers section for that as well.
Well, that's the psychological horror element is something I want to delve into in future games as well, because
cool.
It was my start in tabletop gaming, was psychological horror, and cosmic horror as well. Kind of tacked onto that with Cthulhu's themes. So, and I've had plans for. I mean, anyone on the Patreon or even on the Discord has seen plans for Drift for a long time, and Drift is still going to be like 2 years away, I think, probably at least. Drift being an urban version of a Wild Words game, kind of endless parasitic city, trains rather than ships, and instead of the concept of, like, you know, narratively, death is a narrative experience, which is, I think, is one of the core tenets of the Wild Words engine. Death being something which must fit the narrative. You don't just run out of hit points and die. Out of hit points. Instead, in the Wildsea, death is left very unmechanized. And it's almost entirely a narrative choice. Whereas in Drift, if it ever gets made, which I hope it does, that the death rules are completely different. They are fully mechanized, much more in the realms of something like Heart, where death has tangible mechanical impact on your character. And Drift's death rules is that you will die multiple times, and each death changes your character, and is another way of doing character progression. So, which I think should be quite fun.
That sounds really fun, and I hope to see it made. I know you said
me too.
I know you said it's a while in development, but that sounds amazing. That sounds like up my alley. I'm looking forward to seeing it being made. I'm manifesting it to the universe that it will be made, It's gonna be good,
Hey.
and I'm gonna play it and I'm gonna enjoy it. That's what I'm manifesting into the universe right now. And since we kind of like start talking about other games that utilize the same engine as the Wildsea, let's talk about Pico. So folks at home, Pico is a tabletop role playing game for about 2 to 6 players. Where you play as tiny bugs who band together to explore, make friends, and solve mysteries. And so you're tiny bugs in a big world. It's really, really cool. And we congratulations on crowdfunding for Pico. Well done.
Thanks.
And I wanted to before we touch on kind of like perhaps the different directions you took with the Wild Words engine with Pico, I would love to ask you kind of like what inspired you to make Pico? You were kind of like on a flow with like the Wildsea as well with the expansion. What inspired the pivot or the change of direction here with the game like Pico?
Well, if you want to know that, we're going to delve into the last part of the show with like cautionary tales.
Okay, yeah, we
so-
can tap into
so
that
let
now.
me-
Yeah.
Let me dive into that bit early. Burnout made Pico because I love the Wildsea, but it got to the point where I hated working on it because for the first time in years, I had a measure of success, which was really, really nice.
Yeah.
But it was a measure of success in quite a rigid world. Like I can make the Wildsea do anything, but once it's been out there, once it's been played, and once people have their own ideas of what is or isn't appropriate or canon or etc. And the Wildsea is very, very anti-canon in many ways, but there are still things that people accept and don't accept quite easily about the Wildsea. Writing something in that, you find yourself second guessing what you're writing a lot of the time.
Okay.
You find yourself having to go back and check things in previous books or expansions or add-ons and think like, have I said something about this before? Because you've made a big setting with lots of optional points, and a big setting where one of the fundamental kind of core tenets, I guess, of the setting is like nothing is really canon other than it's a world covered in trees. You can really do what you want after that point. But from a writing perspective, there is more canon to it. There are things that I have mentioned that should stay. Otherwise, people will read it and go, "What did he say that about that thing before? Or did he say something else?"
Yeah.
And that was a very different kind of pressure. And it started making working on the Wildsea less fun. And also, when you've written something that is in one tone of writing, like one register for a long time, you do end up wanting a change.
Yeah.
Pico is much bigger than I thought it would be. Pico was meant to be like a couple of months of palate cleanser, and it has worked as a palate cleanser, most definitely. Like I'm
Love to hear
eager
that.
to get back to Wildsea stuff. It did exactly what it was meant to do, but it also gave me a chance to explore as a writer things that I wouldn't have been able to explore with the Wildsea, because the Wildsea as a kind of weird fantasy world is very inspired by things like the Baz Lag trilogy, China Miéville's writing, like a fantastic author. But it's a very specific brand of weird fantasy. And it's not the only brand of weird fantasy I like, but it's the only brand of weird fantasy that really fits the Wildsea. Whereas Pico is far more Pratchett-esque in some ways. It doesn't take itself seriously. It's got serious bits, but the overall and the world, hangs together reasonably well, I think. But you can just do a lot more silly stuff in Pico because it's about tiny bugs, and so that was a real joy to write, especially the big kind of core chunk of world and character stuff for that was just me going, I want a bug that can do this. Is there a bug in real life that can do this? And after a few days of going through that, thinking like, I don't care if there's a bug in real life that can do this. I want a bug that can do this. And this is a weird post-apocalyptic fantasy bug world. I can do anything I want.
The joy, the unadulterated joy of self-indulgent game design is curative. It can fix you within your bones. It's what I will say on the matter. It feels like.
And Pico being a smaller project as well means you can go a bit deeper into certain things that you couldn't really do in larger games. Like the Wildsea, there are very few restrictions in the Wildsea, but one of them is like fire. Fire isn't typically used. It's one of those things. Now I will be messing with that slightly in the the second big expansion, which is again slated for next year or whenever.
I am looking.
But there are, along those lines, it's kind of a nebulous. It's a hard rule, but it's a nebulous hard rule. It's big and it's not specific. Whereas with Pico, because it is much smaller, and I don't, I'm not thinking about Pico in the same way I think about the Wildsea. Pico is much more of a like, hey, look at this cute thing. And then you play it, and then hopefully you can get a campaign or two out of it, and that's really good. And I really hope people enjoy it, because I've thoroughly enjoyed making it. But it doesn't have the same kind of massive, expansive feel as the Wildsea, and that's by design. It is literally a smaller game about smaller things. Your bugs. Yeah. So you can do things like in Pico, all birds are punks. Like, that's just a thing birds are. In the world of Pico, birds are punks. Some of them are nice punks, some of them are nasty punks, but they're all punks. And you can't do that with something like the Wildsea, because if you say all X are Y in the Wildsea, suddenly that is a huge potential breadth of things. Yeah. Whereas Pico is like, birds are punks. That's easier.
I love that. No, I deeply, deeply love that. I'm so glad to hear that Pico was that successful palette cleanser for you, that you were kind of able to like delve into different aspects of like game design and different principles that you wanted to explore, and just have fun with it. It sounded like you had a lot of fun with it, which is great to hear. And one of the things I wanted to touch on is that, as you said, like Pico does utilize the same engine as the Wildsea, which is the Wild Worlds engine. And I wanted to ask you, like, in some of the aspects that we've already talked about birds being punks, what were the different directions you took with Pico compared to the Wildsea with regards to like the engine and how the engine functioned within the game?
There are certain things in Pico that are work slightly differently in Pico than how they work in the Wildsea.
Yeah.
The core gameplay is roughly the same. There is still elements of travel, there are scenes, there are montages. It's the same kind of explore and do stuff gameplay. But especially for the Weaver, which is Pico's GM figure, you have slightly firmer rules on how you can do certain things and what you can do with certain things. And you also have a lot more guidance, because one of the things that I realized was that the Wildsea, it does take a lot of GM buy-in in terms of understanding not just the bits of the world that you want to present, but like, I didn't give enough guidance. I'm critiquing myself a lot today, but again, it's been a few years since the Wildsea came out. I've got a lot of critiques stored up there. I didn't give enough guidance when writing the book on how you could do certain things as a GM, because for me, and I think this goes back to like that Call of Cthulhu style play space I used to play in. There are certain things that are assumed that you can do. And watching people play the Wildsea and getting feedback from people saying, "No, I wish we could have done, X." I'm sitting there thinking, well, why didn't you do X? Like I would have done X in that situation, and it's because the book didn't say you could do it, and because people don't have the same play experiences as me. So Pico tries to address that a lot more, and there are certain systems in Pico that are new for Wild Words games, but which I might end up using in other games in the future. Wild Words or not, because there are things like the concept of tracks in Pico now have breaks. Because the Wildsea you could have multiple tracks working up to the same thing, or like a larger creature could have like a 3-track and then a 2-track and then a 4-track and then etc. In Pico, tracks just have like, here's a 3 and then a break and then another 2 and then a break. Massive damage or giga damage in Pico fills boxes up to that break, and then you can do something else. But each break, especially when you're facing something like a hazard in combat, although Pico is less combat focused in some ways than the Wildsea, but in a stressful situation, let's say, when you're facing some kind of antagonist or opponent, every time a break is reached, there is specific advice for Pico's GM figure that you can ratchet up or ratchet down the tension of a scene. And there's a list of things you can do, like remove a weakness from this thing, add a strength to this thing, unlock a new move that wouldn't be there. And it's all stuff that I would naturally do if I was in the GM seat myself. But
Mm,
other people don't have that same experience. And there are
yeah.
other things that I've learned. I've seen people playing the Wildsea do that I've had to kind of pull into my own GM style, and some of
Mm,
that stuff makes an appearance in Pico as well.
yeah.
So a lot of the changes to Wild Words that Pico has, cut is another one. In Pico, cut is not quite so open.
Mm.
There are certain kinds of cut, like camo cut, or it might be stealth cut. Words are changing in Pico all the time because it's getting up to release and
Yeah.
feedback, play tests. Armor cut is one of them. So armor cut is a type of cut which is specifically applied when something is big and armored, or when you're trying to
Mm,
tackle something which is kind of like hard and tough to hit, or easy to hit and tough to get through to. And
gotcha. Yeah.
certain aspects that Buzz can have, they do things like ignore armor cut or do more to things that have armor cut. So
Ah, yes.
there are bits that are much more specific than just like, hey, you could ignore cut in this situation. Instead, it's like
Mm,
you ignore this kind of cut, and that is
gotcha.
far more cut and dried for both the player and the GM. It's
Clip
just
that, folks.
yeah, it's a little less. It takes a little less interpretation, I think, rules.
Yeah. No,
Um,
I really love it. I can see what you mean about like in the Wildsea that it is more open ended of like when cut happens and when you get certain abilities, whether it's through like your bloodline or your origin or something, being able to ignore cut kind of just it allows a lot of like fun and useful narrative space. But I can also see where folks are a little inexperienced in that avenue might find themselves a little lost, and having that addition in Pico would be really, really helpful. Thank you so much for sharing about your process around Pico. It's really, really cool to
sorry.
hear you talk about this upcoming game. Folks, go and check it out. Again, use exclamation point games to go and find the links to the relevant games. Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to kind of like pivot away from the Wildsea and Pico and talk about kind of a few like broader things stuff, including cautionary tales of game design. But that's towards the end. Strap in, folks. But first, we're going to talk about niche world building. As the creator of the Wildsea, a huge major strength of your design is the world building that you have. And we've spoken during our production meeting about your desire to talk about the importance and the appreciation for niche world building. So I'm going to start us off with maybe a baseline understanding of what does niche world building mean to you, and why does that matter, and why is it important, do you think, in the creative process?
Oh, this is going to sound bad, no matter how I say
Okay.
it. This is one of those things. So apologies in advance,
Okay.
because I dislike not traditional fantasy. There's a lot of traditional fantasy stuff I really quite enjoy,
Hmm.
but I dislike that traditional fantasy is a category of fantasy,
Yeah.
because for me, those two words don't go together in my head as something that I want to play and take part in and create in the space of. Um,
Okay.
because the whole idea behind fantasy is that you can kind of do anything, tell the stories you want to tell, much like sci-fi.
Hmm.
Because people talk about traditional fantasy, but they don't anywhere near as much talk about traditional sci-fi, because sci-fi is seen as broader, when
Mm.
really it's not, because sci-fi, unless you go into the very soft sci-fi area, is at least vaguely science-based or science related or future related or whatever.
Yeah.
And traditional fantasy, it's in its own, it's a big niche, don't get me wrong, it's a
Yeah.
huge
It's
niche,
massive. Yeah.
but it is still a niche, and it's a niche that is quite cosseting in some ways,
Mm.
because when I say like dragon, you have an image of a dragon. Everyone knows what a dragon is,
Mm.
which means that when you're making the rules for a dragon, you are making something that, unless you go out of your way on purpose to do something really weird with it, which, self-plug, is a thing I do on Patreon. Reinterpreting traditional fantasy tropes is a Patreon thing that happens. I was going to say every month. I'm not that regular. Every now and then. And the same with like the sci-fi and stuff, because it's a fun exercise.
Mm.
But it's something that when you do it, you find yourself having to be like, well, now I have to be different to this thing. if I want to feel different, because it's been done so many times.
Yeah.
Dragons have been done, to death and back. Like there are so many different types and interpretations of dragon, but they all hew to the same kind of core draconic ideal.
Yeah.
And I just don't find that very interesting, unless every now and then I will see something in a kind of traditional fantasy space where something is played almost straight, and then there's a few little quirks in it that I really love. And I think a lot of kind of more niche fantasy world building is just running with those quirks. It doesn't mean you have to redo everything, but I think when the quirks are the thing that makes the thing interesting, focus on those quirks as the more core tenets of the world. And I have a genuinely weird example, because I don't watch a lot of anime. It's not usually my bag. But I did watch Delicious in Dungeon.
Yeah.
And
It's
great
good.
show. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Because also I love food stuff, so watching that was really good. But one of the things I liked the most about Delicious in Dungeon was the way they did the dragon, because in so many ways the dragon is a traditional dragon. But then spoilers, if you haven't watched Delicious in Dungeon and you're thinking of it, I'm going to literally leave like a 10-second pause, so I don't want to spoil this for you because it's really good.
Spoilers.
Don't listen if you want spoilers. The concept that consuming draconic meat draconicizes you over time, and except there are so many cool interpretations of that, and the kind of the health style rebuilding using these elements is like, it opens up a huge new avenue of cool stuff in that world. And I'm sure it's not an entirely unique idea, but because of the way it's presented in an otherwise quite traditional fantasy world, it feels really fresh. And I love that kind of niche world building. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. Yeah.
Same with the again, Delicious in Dungeon. I watched this months ago, but it's still fresh in my mind because it was really good.
Clearly, it's important.
It was a really good example of I guess it's my go-to example for this now. Animated armor. Animated armor is a trope. Animated armor is like a tradition. You want to have your animated armor. And in Delicious in Dungeon, it's like, what's it animated by? Tiny mollusks inside the suit. And it's like, that's a really cool idea. And I haven't seen that before, because it's not just like, magic did it, which is just boring after a while.
Or a spectral entity has taken host in this old armor. Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with those ideas, but it's so nice to see something new, and especially to be surprised by something new.
Absolutely, yeah.
It reminds me very much of okay, I'm going to really age myself now. Did you ever play or watch a Let's Play of Vagrant Story, the old Square Enix game? Actually, it might have been Square.
Wow, that's a deep cut. I've never played it, but I do know of it.
So Vagrant Story was really, really good at slightly reinterpreting traditional things. And it was a really good, because part of it is like, it's the Japanese take on Western fantasy, which is always going to have interesting little kind of things that you wouldn't expect as someone who's grown up with the Western take on Western fantasy. And I love what they've done with certain elements of Vagrant Story. I say what they've done. It was literally 25 years ago. It's maybe 30. It's an old game. It's a really old game. But it's a good game, and it holds up today. And a lot of the creatures and things that fight hold up today, because it goes at tropes, but it hits them in a slightly different way than you expect, and that's really, really good. So I've tried to bring as much of that as I can into when I world build. I like looking at the niche something fills, and then trying to think of, is there a way I can do this that I don't instantly recognize as being from something else? And I think in terms of the Wildsea, one of my favorite ones for that is the Ironbound, which are they are the animated armor trope. Like that's what they are. And the Chelicerae also are the animated armor trope. They are, a suit. But the Chelicerae are animated because they are hive minds of spiders wearing like weird self-woven skins or a collection of armor scraps and rags. And the Ironbound are armored because they are either self-created or like risen from a not watery grave in the depths of a ship's old crew. And it's like a construct made of an ancient ship that maybe carries the memories of its crew and the souls and emotions, etc. They aren't completely off the wall ideas that you hear them and you go, oh, okay, fair enough. But they are niche in their presentation, and I want to see more of that. I think it's really important.
Yeah,
because it's more fun than just going, oh yeah, and the Wildsea's also got a construct. What does it do? It's a construct, isn't it?
No, that I agree, because like I remember when I first read about the Ironbound, and I was really taken in by the idea of like old like tech, especially in like the Wildsea as a setting, right? Being like, oh, old tech found in maybe ruins, maybe in an old ship, that has somehow been reanimated, whether by the power of emotions, some other unexplained thing, or souls and things like that. And that was enough for me, who isn't I'm not typically taken in by constructs as just as a matter of like flavor. But I remember when I was reading this, I was like, this is cool, niche, and weird enough for me to go, maybe I might play this one day, because this sounds like a lot of fun, and a very interesting like character to delve into. And I think you raised a really good point about the feeling of like how refreshing something is when you're able to give it just enough quirks for it to be niche, unique, and feel different when a player, or if anyone experiences it. So that, I guess, my tough question of you is, how niche is too niche? Is it too niche? Is there such a thing?
Yes, there is, I think.
All right, nice.
I don't want to be completely like prescriptive here, because I'm just a guy at the end of the day. This is just my opinion and just how I do things. And it works well for me, might not work well for someone else. Just experiment, do what you want. I'm just one person. But I think something gets too niche when you have to repeatedly check the written fiction of it to make sure you're not getting it wrong.
I see. Yeah.
I'll go back to dragons as an example, because I did this on the Patreon. When I was doing Felix Reinterprets Traditional Fantasy, one of the updates was about dragons. And I could have done anything with it, really, because it's a reinterpretation. That's the whole point. It's you can remix dragons to be whatever you want. Dragons could be like the Chenekrate. They could be hive minds of spiders. That could be a dragon. It's my own world I'm making. I could do what I want.
Yeah.
But that kind of thing, it takes it too far away from the source material. And it gets to the point of like, what were dragons again? Because you've lost that kind of dragon cognate.
I see.
So what I did with dragons in the Felix Reinterprets Fantasy thing is they are somewhere between like a kind of, if I remember it rightly, it was a while back, coalescing things that are made of or feed on gold and other metals to form essentially a dragon-like shell around a kind of fire elemental type thing.
Gotcha.
So it's still draconic in its purest essence. It is a big, scary thing that is hard to kill, which looks like a dragon and which breathes fire. And it still hoards gold and does all this thing. But you come at it from slightly different angles on some of those essential parts. The mechanics and mechanisms behind it may be a little different.
Different, yeah.
And I think that's quite fun to do, because at the end of the day, when you go a little bit further but not too far, theoretically, you should be in a place where people go, dragons, okay, and they can remember like that one or two interesting different things about dragons. Oh, they're like fire elements inside. Oh, they're made from the metal they eat. Like, those are two interesting facts about my weird dragons. But you don't have to remember, oh, and they also have 6 toes on each foot, except because you don't need all the extra stuff. It needs to still be logical. What you make needs to have internal logic as well.
Yeah.
So for the kind of Felix Reinterprets Traditional Fantasy Patreon stuff, You've got dragons who are, they consume metal, they make their bodies out of it. Inside them is some kind of fire elemental type thing, which so you've still got those draconic elements. It breathes fire, it is hard to kill, it is big, it looks like a dragon, it hoards metals, etc. You aren't introducing loads and loads of new stuff. You're just giving a few reinterpretations of things that could lead to different types of encounters, different kinds of stories. But you could, because you're reinterpreting, because you want to be niche, you could do anything. You could be like, well, in my world, dragons could only move east. And like that is a thing. Like, and you could make a good story out of that. You could make a good thing out of that. But that doesn't say dragon.
Yeah.
It's just dragon with an extra weird thing that I now have to remember. Because at the end of the day, that in a lot of people's heads, if they're not like fully involved in the setting, gets to, well, dragons only move in one direction. I can't remember which direction that was. Dragons, wait, why can dragons only move east? Do I have to, is there law for that? And then you have to look it up and it's a whole new thing. For me, that goes too far.
Okay.
Which is why I try not to, when I do really niche stuff, if I want to do something that's really odd, like the Chelicrate spidery hive mind thing, the idea of it is simple, and I don't attach it to an existing thing. So it's not like, oh, elves in my world are actually spider hive minds that live for a long time. It's because then you have to kind of take all the elf tropes and then throw the new tropes on top, and then it's just easier to do a simple but distinctive idea, I think. For something that is new, or if you're reinterpreting or referencing something that exists, most of what that thing is, with one or two cool things or one or two changes that make it interesting or unique, I think is an easier way of doing things.
That makes a lot of sense. There is like a really, really powerful, I think, and helpful tool in being able to like bank on a little bit of like what has traditionally existed and kind of like using that schema to transform and make something like interesting, cool, and engaging with folks, because it saves you half the explanation as well, because if you're able to tap into those like really, really strong thematic elements, there's also that immediate buy-in from like readers, from players, game masters, etc. So that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, okay. I have an example. Sorry, I've just given an example. I have a Wildsea specific example. One of my favorite bits, and it's a really small bit of writing. It's a hazard that doesn't even get a full write-up. It's literally a single paragraph called Tiltwyn's Band. Tiltwyn's Band is a kind of a hazard you can run across where they are people affected by, it might be like a kind of mental contagion that makes them believe that they are acting out piracy to an appreciative audience. In the actual world, they're just pirates. Like, they raid ships, they kill people, they're pirates. But in their head, they are in this elaborate stage play, and they're loving it, and everyone else is loving it too. And there's a reason I can do that idea in one paragraph, and it's because people know what pirates are. And if I changed too much what pirates were for like the wider Wildsea, if I'd gone like, well, actually pirates in the Wildsea are like the pirates, but they're also this, and this, that's a whole extra load of stuff you have to remember. Absolutely. Whereas as long as so like going niche, going weird, going odd, that's all really fun, but not if it's the core pillars that everyone has to kind of be on board with. I think that's hopefully a good example.
That's a great example. That makes a lot of sense, because when we introduce folks to the Wildsea, being able like pirates, but the sea is trees, is really, really helpful, because folks know what pirates are, and it's a great way to kind of introduce folks without a great way for them to dip their toes in as well before they get consumed by the wider lore, which makes a lot of sense. So thank you for sharing, Felix, your thoughts about like niche world building. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, the other thing which I think is really important niche world building wise is to have big, simple core concepts. Because again, you want things people can remember. And especially if you can combine them down to a single sentence, that's perfect. And you just did it for the Wildsea, which is, the Wildsea is many, many things. It's got all these weird little intricacies. It's got its own little bits of history and lore, but essentially it's the sea is trees. That's it. And if you can kind of internalize that, then you can get on to the next bit, which is, and ships have like chainsaws and stuff. And it's like, okay,
Which
that
is
makes sense.
metal as fucking cool.
And they're two odd ideas, but they're weird ideas, and they're not usual ideas. They're not common ideas, but they're not outside the realms of what your brain can handle. It's like, okay, X is Y, and that means Z. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Wildsea, with all of its like new elements that they're introducing in the Wildsea, in like the lore itself, is incredibly intuitive. For folks who are like coming in, I'm like, oh, Crezerin? I suppose the trees have to grow in somehow. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's particularly
there's
vicious.
loads of
That
stuff.
makes sense.
Yeah, there's loads of stuff in the Wildsea that really does exist just to prop up that fiction. Like the only reason Crezerin exists is like, oh, why do trees grow fast? Oh, there's this weird chemical. Oh, what does it do? Makes things grow fast, I guess. Where did it come from? I don't know.
Yeah.
Just make it up yourself. It's a role playing game.
The role playing game. You can delve into the secrets of Crezerin in your own. That's a campaign. That's a campaign call of action right there.
Yeah. Because if you detail it too much, then it's like, okay, well, there's this chemical. It's called Crezerin. It comes from this. It does exactly, explicitly this, and this. That's extra lore you have to remember. The Wildsea is like a big setting-focused game, and the setting chapter is like 20 pages. And that's all and you really need one of those pages, which is core concepts. So
that's true. And it's one of my favorite things about it. I'm like, read this page and then we can get back to playing. I'll explain everything else as it comes up and as you have questions. I'll make some stuff on the spot as game masters do if I have to. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about niche world building. I think there's something really empowering about being able to like add your own weird little thing to things that you appreciate and making new and distinctive things that are self-indulgent and new and cool to you, because it is cool to you. It's probably cool to someone else too. Now
I want to see more of that from people too. I want people to explore their own niches and find what they like and write about the stuff they like, rather than think, well, if I'm doing a fantasy game, I better put orcs in there. If you don't like orcs, don't put orcs in there. I don't care, you know.
Do stuff that you like. Do stuff that you like. Make stuff that you like, and play stuff that you like, and like scream about the stuff that you like. I think.
Well, Rowan Rook and Deckard's Heart is like the perfect example of good weird fantasy, because it hangs itself on some established tropes. There's elves, there's dark elves, there's gnolls. I know what a gnoll is. What's a gnoll in Heart? It's kind of a gnoll. But like, what is their role in society? Well, that's a bit more complex. But I don't have to like grapple with like, what is this big new thing, etc., etc.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the rest of the stuff they've done is weird, but they've given you some like points to hang all the weird off. Yeah. So.
Absolutely.
Anyway, sorry. Yes. I'll
apologize.
Weird niche world building now.
Never apologize about talking about niche world building. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, and I appreciate hearing thoughts from a kindred spirit. As we're beginning to wrap up, we've got a kind of big, heavy, chunky bit of the interview left, but we're going to talk about the plights and perils of being an independent game designer, and some cautionary tales and maybe lessons learned. So I wanted to turn to this journey that you've had as a game designer. I mean, an incredible one that it is. You start with role playing in a club, and then you started building like small mechanics. Then you built the Wildsea, which took several years of your life, and it's a success. Your work on Pico is also a success. And I wanted to ask you about what have been the roses and what have been the thorns of your journey so far.
Okay. The two biggest roses, the flexibility of work is lovely, and that's become a massive thing as well post-COVID. That the concept of more flexible hours really helps. And that's just a general life thing, but it's a really important general life thing, especially when you're working in a creative field, and especially when you're not just having to be creative yourself, but you're having to network with other creative people who all have their own schedules and they're all doing their own thing. And the slow. Let me elaborate. I worked myself way too hard during COVID because I had nothing else to do and I wasn't going out. But there was a good few months. There was a solid year where I was I worked every day, like no weekends, no nothings, because there was nothing else to do.
Yeah.
But a few months of that year leading up to like the first big release, I was on purpose sleeping in 2 shifts so I could be awake for artists in different time zones at their most productive times. I absolutely wrecked my physical and mental health doing that. Because being awake for, most of the night, then going to sleep at 4 a.m. For like 3 hours, and then waking up and then going to sleep again at like 2 p.m. because if you wake up like 3 hours after that, then you're just at the right place for someone in this time zone to like get to you their stuff, and then you're there to instantly reply. That was terrible. And like, don't do that. That's good advice. Don't do that.
Don't do that. I saw who did that. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Working in something like RPGs, the amount of, I guess this is a thorn and a rose.
Yeah.
You decide the amount of effort you put in. And that means when you get taken away by a project, as you should, if you really love it, like you will put in more hours than you would in a regular job for far less pay or no pay sometimes. That's just a thing you'll do. And that is the rose side of that, is you can indulge that creative passion, and that feels so good. Yeah. And the thorn side of that is you can overindulge that creative passion, and that gets so bad after a while.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't do that. The other big thorn, I think, and this is something this is not like some expose. I think it's obvious when you think about it, but it's scary to come to terms with. You don't decide how successful you are. Other people do.
Yeah.
And if the Quinn's review has shown anything, it's that the Wildsea now gets 10 times the amount of attention it did a couple of years ago, and that is down to a lot of people. It's down to MythWorks and the publishers doing some amazing work. It's down to me putting the work in. It's down to the community spreading the word. But a big chunk of it is down to the decision of like one person, and I assume their small team probably, going like, "Oh, this is a cool thing. We'll feature this," and that is just a decision that I would never have known about if it didn't involve me. And it's just like out of the blue, someone goes, "Hey, we'll feature you on this thing," and you go, "Oh, that's cool," and then it changes your entire life. Like workflow, finance, everything, the people you know, how people talk to you, it changes everything about it.
Yeah.
There is nothing I could have done that would have made that happen if someone else hadn't taken an interest in the thing I made. Yeah. And it's very much like the rose side of that is it's more likely to happen when you've made something you're proud of and you enthusiastically represent and you love doing. That's good. But the thorn side of that is it is random at the end of the day. I have seen so many brilliant games that just don't get recognized. And it goes far beyond games as well. So many brilliant things that just don't get recognized.
Yeah.
There are people I know who I think of as I am lucky to work in the same orbit as them, who have not had the financial success. They do not do it full time the way I do. And I try and shine a light on their stuff every now and then because it's what you have to try and do, I think, to kind of foster a good community. And I think people deserve it. But at the end of the day, the Wildsea is much, much bigger than me. I'm just a guy. So like our sensitivity consultant, he is a brilliant sensitivity consultant, Ryan Kahn, excellent guy. He is also an incredible creator of micro games in his own right. And in fact, I literally have some. I've got 3 Hunters on the shelf there. Excellent game. Little pamphlet-sized thing. Brilliant game. One of the games he made, Told by Starlight, is the best micro game I've ever played.
Oh my goodness.
It's about slowly drawing, linking the points between dots to form constellations and building the mythology of a universe as you build these constellations.
Oh my goodness, yes,
Incredible
I know this game. Yes, I know this game, yes.
It's a brilliant game.
It's brilliant.
And it's a brilliant game that sits as part of the core idea behind, if I ever get around to working on Drift, the way map making works in Drift is directly inspired by Told by Starlight. because it's such a good system of putting
Yeah.
things together, but it's just mostly unrecognized because people don't hear about things.
Yeah.
And there's only so much an individual can do without being repped by a massive outside source or getting really, really lucky. So
Yeah.
I guess the thought there is you can direct your own success to a point, but you never have full control over how something comes across or how much money you make or how much attention you get.
Yeah.
And that is terrifying to
It
work with.
is.
Um,
Absolutely.
going from the Wildesea to Pico as well, that was terrifying
Mhm.
because the Wildesea pulled in some really big numbers towards the end as well.
Yeah.
And Pico is like, well, it's from Felix Isaacs, the guy that made the Wildsea. And it's like, yeah, okay, but no one really knows me as a designer. I'm still very new to the space. The Wildsea is my first game. I don't have this kind of long storied history. So when it's like, hey, Pico's there, okay, might be good. I don't know. Made one good thing, I suppose. Some people think it's good. I don't know if that's going to be financially successful or not, but because of the Kickstarter ecosystem and the general TTRPG ecosystem, you have to get a lot ready. You can't do mostly unfinished products anymore.
Yeah.
So, like for the Wildsea, for a long time, it was like, yeah, just hope and a prayer that'll work. We've got this black and white thing that's like 60 pages, doesn't have a background, mostly art, still sketches, and you can throw that out there because you're new. Now, not so new. It's like, well, we need a really nice trailer for it. I mean, to have a good full color working copy. Can't be too janky, can't be too bad, because then people will think it's going to be bad. And it's like, okay, how much is that going to cost again before we get any money for it? So, yeah, it really changes the dynamics. And that can be terrifying.
Yeah, no, that makes thank you for illuminating all of that, because these are things that I deeply relate to, and I have seen as being a creator in the space. But I think it's also deeply important to talk about them, because these are challenges that folks face. And perhaps it's not shame, but maybe a slight trepidation in wanting to speak about it and be open about it, because everyone's trying to put a brave face forward when things are scary and uncertain. And sometimes, as a creative, you might be shouting into the void and things like that. And it's some folks might be a little hesitant to speak about that. So it's important that we're having that conversation now. We talked a little bit about burnout, and Pico being kind of your avenue to remedy that a little bit. And as you've spoken just now, you faced a number of challenges, a lot of stuff that you had to learn on the fly, and adapt, and especially with not having weird sleep schedules. Don't do that, folks. I cannot emphasize that enough. You will wreck your body, and it will not thank you for it.
It's amazing the toll it takes.
Yep. Oh yeah. No, I feel like I only recovered from doing that for the past couple of years last Christmas. Mostly because I got taken out by an illness, so I was forced to sleep. And then I went, I don't want to do that anymore. But I wanted to ask you about, since we're talking about cautionary tales and stuff like that, what is some maybe tough love advice, or some key advice you'd want to give to independent designers, upcoming designers, folks who are thinking of wanting to do their own stuff, rule books, their own games, or any other creative venture? What would you tell them, or maybe wish you had told yourself?
Okay, how brutal can I be?
As brutal as you'd like to be, Felix. This is your interview. This is your show.
Okay, then again, this is just from me. I'm just one person, etc., etc. Don't take this as universal advice. It is definitely not. But from my perspective and from what I've seen, I would say the biggest bit of advice to avoid heartbreak and despair in the TTRPG industry as a writer/creator, realize early that no one really cares about your words unless they are drawn in by something else. Especially when you are a kind of unknown. You need something. For me, it was art.
Mm.
The early artists of the Wildsea, Pierre Demet, fantastic artist. Oma-chan, I've worked with for like 7 years now. Does all the character art for the Wildsea. Amazing person to work with. Schmeckrel does and Mon. There's a kind of little roster of Wildsea artists. I am proud of the writing I did for the Wildsea, but it would never have taken off if I couldn't hit r/world building early on with a bit of writing and a picture to go with it, because that picture is what draws the eye. A block of text could be the most amazing block of text you ever read, but it has to get you to read it first.
Yeah.
And a one-line title saying, "Here's my new game," that's not going to do it. Like, it's just not going to do it. There are people, lovely people out there, who will go through and search for things in their most like basic, I've got a Google Doc of some rules and a page of setting form. And those are amazing people. And I wish I had that mindset. And I've tried every now and then to kind of delve into it and look at stuff that wouldn't otherwise grab me visually. But I'm a very visual person. That's what appeals to me in terms of a lot of games. There are games on my big shelf of games that I haven't read any words of, really. I just own them, and I've flipped the books and I've looked at the art, and I've like, I get the vibes of this world. I love the way this setting is put together for the art. Maybe I'll read the game at some point, but for now, that game is a positive in my mind because it looks good.
Yeah.
Now, there is a caveat to this, which is that does not mean you have to spend a lot of money on art. Because especially at the moment, financially, you just might not have it. I certainly didn't when I was doing early Wildsea stuff. I was lucky that I was working full time and I could afford art as an extra thing. But even then, before we hit Kickstarter, I'd spent about, I think, £3,500 on art. For a lot of people these days, and even for me back then, if I'm brutally honest about my living conditions and what I ate, I couldn't afford that. People can't afford that. That's a lot of art.
It's a lot of money
to spend on art. I would say, to avoid that kind of heartbreak of like, hey, I've written this thing that I think is really good, but no one's looking at it. Find an artist that you like and just get 1 or 2 bits of art. Even a page of sketches can help. Like, it doesn't matter what it is, just something to distinguish what you make from, this is my Google Doc of words that may or may not be good. Because this is my Google Doc of words that may or may not be good has I don't know the actual statistic, but in my head, it's like a 95% higher chance of being read. If it's, this is my Google Doc of words that may or may not be good, that's a cool picture.
There is definitely like, I know that I'm drawn to beautiful art. I know that I'm drawn to like, and we can and we should be. I think it's great to support artists. And as I know you framed it as like really like, oh yeah, this could be like really brutal advice and stuff like that, but also in a slight reframe, this is a great opportunity to work with people, which is also, I feel like, a huge boon to have in the community, because then you have actively someone who cares by virtue of like working with you about your vision, what you're looking at, what are the visuals that you're wanting to put in, and that can be very heartening to have also, which which is great. And but I do definitely agree with you of like having visuals, even the smallest bit, if you're unable to commission artists, the smallest bit of like training in graphic design using to like lots. There's so many folks out there who like sell assets on like Ko-fi or like royalty-free images that you could collate very, very well and make into something beautiful, aesthetically pleasing to go with your game text, which is important. I remember my husband taught me just like a little bit of graphic design, and I was like, wow, my stuff looks infinitely better now than it used to.
Same, 100% the same. I had done so much Wildsea when Ray, part of MythWorks, the kind of publisher, he convinced me, and I was not receptive to the idea at first, but he convinced me and I think it's one of the best things he's ever convinced me of, to bring on not just an editor for the words, but someone to properly not just do example layouts, but to lay out a few pages of extant Wildsea writing and art in the way that they think is best. And he brought on Leo, also known as Blue 2 Days, I believe, creator of Parslings. Great game. Very, very lovely looking game. Leo is incredible in many ways, and one of those people that just does stuff all the time in a way that I can't imagine doing without burning out constantly. But what Leo did was not just do like, oh, here are some templates, here are some pages, here's what they could look like. He taught me a better way of doing the things I was doing already. And he moved me from, I think, Serif Publishing back then to InDesign. I didn't like InDesign, but Leo made me like InDesign.
My husband has a love-hate relationship with InDesign, so I understand.
Yeah. Oh, it is an incredibly powerful creative tool, which annoys me without fail every day that I use it. So yeah.
Yeah.
But that extra bit of layout love and like learning a few basic principles, like, oh, why not do this? Because of X. Oh, okay, that makes sense. And then you look at the page and you're like, that does look better. And that's the same thing when someone else that isn't you looks at the page before they even read the first word. That's a nice page. Even if they don't literally think it, their brain is interpreting. That is better than a single block paragraph of 50 lines.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Many folks are like visual creatures, and like tapping into that instinct is super, super important. The amount of like just sheer improvements folks can see if they take like a graphic design class or they like pay attention to layout. My challenge to you, audience, go crack open some of your TTRPG rulebooks, maybe the ones you haven't looked at in a while, and just take a few moments to enjoy the layout, enjoy the work of people who do the incredible work of like doing all these things, and maybe you learn a thing or two about how you want to lay out your next entry into a game jam, even if it's like a micro RPG. I know that that's one of my favorite things to do. So just like go back to old rule books, see how they're laid out, see how they take certain like like visual elements and things like that, and you learn a lot. Even if you're not necessarily able to execute something similar, you can get ideas and give it to someone who is qualified, who you can pay to help you out with that. And I know there's loads of people who do work, especially layout designers and artists, who are willing to work within a set budget. Do not be afraid to ask. Absolutely do not be afraid to ask. With that, Felix, thank you so much for chatting with me, taking time out of your day to be my guest here on Dicey Banter. As we begin to wrap up, would you like to tell folks about where they can find you and how they can support you of any upcoming projects you have?
You can find me in some places. Just search for Felix Isaacs. I think the one that I guess the one that I care the most about in terms of community is the Discord, the Wild Words Discord, which you'll find links to scattered around the place. I think there's one on the Itch page as well. Again, Felix Isaacs on Itch, and there's like some on the Kickstarter. They're just there in places. There's
it will be there for your convenience, audience, when you use the command at exclamation point Felix. Don't you worry, I've done the work for you. Now you need to go and join.
But yeah, that's so like search for Felix Isaacs or search for the Wildsea or search for Wild Words. I'm not terribly active on social media, but I am active on the Discord because that is my little community of awesome people that do cool things. And that's really fun. Can I rep someone that's not me?
Absolutely, you can. Yeah.
Not even a specific person. If you can, this is going to sound so weird, but I genuinely think it's great. If you can, playtest stuff. If you go to conventions, especially, try to playtest stuff that you wouldn't otherwise play. I will not name any specific names for this one because I don't know if the thing is literally open to the public yet. But I went to Breakout Con last year, and I thought, like, yeah, I've got some time. I can playtest some stuff from new designers. One of the games I played there was one of the best games I've ever played at a tabletop. And it took 10 minutes of introduction. And it was like this card-based multi-path story thing. It was
Ooh.
brilliant. It was really, really fun. And I would never have had that experience if I hadn't thought like, yeah, I'll take a chance on something new. Take a chance on something new. So I guess I'm repping novelty. Where can you find Felix? I don't care. Just find other people. I'm not very good at advertising myself.
No, that is a-okay. Folks know where to find you, and also that's a great challenge. I second this. Please go and do that. Go check out games that you wouldn't otherwise go and check out. Give them a read. Grab community copies, whatever you need to that's accessible for you, and give it a shot. I think that's great. Thank you so much, Felix. It's such an honor to be able to interview you. And as we begin wrapping up, hi, folks. I'm Valiant Dorian. I use him, his pronouns. This has been Dicey Banter. You can find me all across the internet at Valiant Dorian or at Auto Spirit Bear. Please enjoy that lovely treasure hunt I just set you on. And you can find me in a slew of other projects. By the time this comes out, I feel a little uncertain about which ones I should say or not, just by virtue of when release dates are happening. But keep an eye on my socials. You'll know when those come out. And if you want to support this show in a more concrete way, please consider one, talking about it, sharing about it, and sharing the episodes, putting a comment on the YouTube VOD helps a ton. Another thing that you can do is also pledge to our Patreon. Even at the free tier, you get news about some of the work that I'm doing, sneak peeks, works in progress, things like that. But in higher tiers, you can get access to early episodes of Dicey Banner, being able to vote on aspects of the show you like to see next time, and all that good stuff. So please consider doing that. And I appreciate you all. And once more, thank you again, Felix, for being my guest. And we're no doubt going to be rating somebody incredible. So please stick around for the rate message and send them some Spirit Bear love. And with that, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your evening. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.